It was an October night in Portland, Oregon, when Officer Marcus Chen began his night shift, as he had done so many times over the past 15 years. The rain fell heavily on the asphalt, creating reflections of the city lights in the puddles that formed on the deserted streets. Marcus was 42 years old, his hair beginning to grey at the temples, and his eyes weary from having seen too much in his career. That particular night, around 3 in the morning, he received a radio call about a suspicious vehicle parked in an alley near the city's industrial district. The car had its headlights on, the engine running, but had been completely stationary for more than 20 minutes, according to reports from a security guard at a nearby factory. Marcus drove his patrol car along Interstate 5, taking the exit toward the abandoned warehouses that characterized that forgotten part of Portland. The neighborhood had a history of criminal activity, mainly drug trafficking and prostitution, so calls like that weren't exactly rare. When he arrived at the indicated location, he saw a black sedan, an older model, probably from the late 90s, with tinted windows and a license plate that appeared to have been partially covered in mud. Marcus activated his BODYCAM, standard procedure, and cautiously approached the vehicle. The rain continued relentlessly, beating against the hood of his uniform as he slowly moved toward the driver's side window. What Marcus didn't know was that this moment would completely change everything he thought he knew about his own life. 12 years earlier, in 2012, Marcus had lost the woman he loved. Sarah Mitchell was a social worker who worked with homeless populations in Portland. She was 28 years old when she disappeared without a trace. Marcus and Sarah had met on an emergency call where she was assisting a family in crisis. They started dating 6 months later and planned to get married. Sarah was described by everyone who knew her as a person with an immense heart, always willing to help others, sometimes even putting herself in dangerous situations to protect those under her care. On the night of her disappearance, Sarah had told Marcus she was going to meet a client in a troubled area of the city. She mentioned something about a young woman who was trying to escape an abusive relationship and needed urgent help. Marcus tried to convince her to wait until the next day, or at least let him accompany her, but Sarah was stubborn and determined. She said the situation couldn't wait, that the girl was in immediate danger. That was the last time Marcus saw her alive, or at least that's what he believed for all those years. Sarah never returned home that night. Her car was found 3 days later abandoned near the docks, with her purse and cell phone still inside, but no sign of her. The investigation into Sarah's disappearance completely consumed Marcus. He used every resource available, pressured every contact he had in the police department, followed every lead, no matter how small. For months he barely slept, barely ate, obsessed with the idea of finding her. The police initially treated the case as a kidnapping, then as a possible homicide when weeks passed without any sign of life. Theories emerged, some suggesting that Sarah had been a victim of human trafficking, others that she had been killed by someone connected to the criminal underworld whom she had inadvertently offended through her social work. But there was never any conclusive proof of anything. No body was found, no witnesses came forward, no forensic evidence led anywhere. Sarah had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her. Over the years, Marcus tried to move on. He never remarried, never truly managed to leave Sarah behind. Her absence was like a wound that never fully healed. He continued working as a police officer, perhaps because it kept him occupied, perhaps because somewhere deep in his mind, he still hoped that one day, on some routine call, he would find a clue that would lead him to her. His colleagues knew the story, some with pity, others thinking Marcus needed therapy, but all respected his space and rarely mentioned the subject. To the rest of the world, Sarah Mitchell was just another name in a statistic of missing persons who were never found. Returning to that rainy October night, Marcus approached the driver's side window of the black sedan, his flashlight in hand. He tapped on the glass with his knuckles, a standard procedure to wake anyone who might be sleeping inside the vehicle. There was no immediate response. Marcus waited a few seconds and tapped again, this time harder, loudly identifying himself as a police officer. It was then that he saw movement inside the car. The window began to slowly descend, creaking as if it hadn't been used in a long time. Marcus directed his flashlight into the interior of the vehicle, prepared for anything, his other hand instinctively moving towards the gun in its holster. What he saw when the flashlight illuminated the driver's face made his heart stop for a moment. There, sitting in the driver's seat, with longer, darker hair than he remembered, with a visible scar on the left side of her face that definitely hadn't been there before, was Sarah Mitchell, or at least someone who was absolutely identical to her. Marcus felt his legs weaken. His mouth instantly went dry, and for a brief moment he thought he was having some kind of nervous breakdown or hallucination. But the body cam kept recording, capturing every second of that impossible encounter. The woman in the car looked at him with red, bloodshot eyes, not from tears, but from something more disturbing, something he couldn't immediately identify. Marcus tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was only a few seconds, he managed to whisper her name, Sarah, as a question laden with 12 years of pain, confusion, and desperate hope. The woman in the car tilted her head slightly to the side, studying his face as if trying to remember something distant and hazy. Then she spoke, and her voice was exactly as Marcus remembered it, that soft but firm tone he had heard so many times in his dreams and nightmares. She said simply, "I knew you would find me eventually, Marcus." There was something in her tone that wasn't quite right. A mechanical quality, as if she were reciting lines from a script she had rehearsed many times. Marcus immediately turned on his radio, requesting backup, but kept his eyes fixed on her, afraid that if he looked away for even a second, she would disappear again, like a mirage. Sarah didn't try to run or resist. She simply sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring ahead through the rain-covered windshield. Marcus asked her to get out of the vehicle slowly, keeping her hands where he could see them. She obeyed without hesitation, moving with a strange, almost artificial grace. When she was completely out of the car, Marcus could see that she was wearing dark clothes, all black, and that there was something unsettling about how she moved, as if every gesture was carefully calculated. While they waited for the backup to arrive, Marcus tried to ask questions. Where have you been? What happened to you? Why have you never come back? But Sarah only responded with vague fragments, saying things like, "I was away," or "they kept me," or "you wouldn't understand even if I explained." Her answers were frustrating and critical at the same time. Marcus noticed that she avoided direct eye contact, always looking slightly to the side or down. There was also a strange odor coming from her, something chemical mixed with mold, as if she had been somewhere damp and enclosed for a long time. When the backup vehicles arrived, along with an ambulance Marcus had requested, Sarah was placed under protective custody. Paramedics attempted to examine her, but she passively resisted, neither fighting nor cooperating. Marcus insisted on accompanying her to the hospital, even knowing that technically he should recuse himself from the case due to his emotional involvement. On the way to the hospital, inside the ambulance, Sarah finally looked directly at Marcus and said something that froze him to the bone. She said, "I'm not who you think I am anymore, Marcus. They've changed a lot." There was something in her eyes at that moment, something definitely not human, a reddish glint that lasted only a fraction of a second, but which the body cam captured perfectly. At the hospital, Sarah underwent a battery of medical and psychiatric tests. The results were disturbing and contradictory. Physically, she was identical to Sarah Mitchell in almost every aspect. The fingerprints were a match. The dental structure corresponded to records from 12 years prior. Even a small birthmark on her right shoulder was in the exact place where it should be. However, there were anomalies that doctors couldn't explain. Her body temperature was consistently lower than normal, around 34 degrees Celsius, when it should have been around 37. Her heart rate was irregular, sometimes dropping to dangerously low levels and then rising abruptly for no apparent reason. Neurological exams revealed something even more disturbing. There were scars on her brain, tissue patterns that suggested invasive surgeries, but when questioned about it, Sarah had no memory of any medical procedure. The psychiatrists who interviewed her reported that she exhibited symptoms consistent with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as possible dissociative episodes. She frequently spoke about a place where she had been held, describing it as cold, dark, and full of other people who were also lost. When pressed for specific details about the location of this place, she would enter states of panic, sometimes screaming that they were listening or that they would come for her again. Marcus spent days trying to piece together the puzzle. He reviewed the entire original investigation into Sarah's disappearance, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. He re-interviewed everyone who'd been questioned at the time, searching for inconsistencies or new information. What he discovered was a series of other disappearances that followed a pattern similar to Sarah's. Over the past 15 years, at least 9 other people in the Portland area had disappeared under similar circumstances, all of them social workers, nurses, or people in helping professions. And most disturbingly, 3 of these people had recently reappeared, all in states similar to Sarah's, confused, with fragmented memories and exhibiting the same unexplained physical anomalies. The investigation led Marcus to an old industrial complex on the outskirts of Portland that had been abandoned for over 20 years. City records showed that the site had been the location of controversial pharmaceutical experiments in the 1980s before being shut down after a series of ethical violations. Marcus obtained a search warrant and led a team of investigators to the site. What they found inside was like something out of a horror movie. There was evidence of recent occupation, including medical equipment, files containing information on all the missing victims, and, most disturbingly, video recordings showing procedures being performed on these people while they were unconscious. The recordings were horrific to watch. They showed the victims being subjected to some kind of experimental therapy, with devices being implanted in their brains while off-camera voices discussed results and necessary adjustments. Sarah appeared in several of these videos over several years, suggesting she had been held in that place the entire time she was missing. The dates on the recordings were inconsistent, some missing entirely, others seemingly altered, making it difficult to establish a precise timeline of events. Marcus confronted Sarah with these findings, hoping that perhaps the visual evidence might awaken clearer memories. Her reaction was unexpected and terrifying. Upon seeing the images of herself on those procedure tables, Sarah went into convulsions, her eyes rolled back, and she began speaking in a voice that wasn't entirely her own, a voice that sounded like multiple people speaking in unison. She said nonsensical things about a higher purpose, about forced evolution, about becoming more than human. The doctors had to sedate her to prevent her from harming herself. When Sarah finally awoke from sedation, something had changed. She seemed more lucid, more present, but also deeply saddened. She told Marcus that she had fragmented memories of what had happened to her. She remembered being taken that night 12 years ago, not by the person who was trying to help, but by other people who were waiting, people who seemed to know exactly who she was and where she would be. She remembered waking up in that cold place and discovering that she wasn't alone, that there were others there, all of them confused and frightened. She remembered the procedures, the pain, the voices saying that they were being improved, that when the process was complete they would be released to return to their lives. But Sarah also said something Marcus didn't want to believe. She said that the others who had been kept with her had begun to change over time, that their personalities had begun to fragment, that they were no longer completely themselves. She was afraid the same thing had happened to her, that the person speaking to Marcus now was just an echo of what Sarah Mitchell had been. She pleaded with him not to trust her completely, to treat everything she said with skepticism, because she herself wasn't sure which of her memories were real and which had been implanted or altered. The investigation of the abandoned complex revealed connections to an international network of unauthorized human experiments. Documents found at the site mentioned funding from obscure sources, including pharmaceutical companies that officially no longer existed and organizations that appeared to be fronts for something much larger and more sinister. The FBI took over the case, classifying much of the findings as sensitive information, and Marcus was essentially excluded from subsequent investigations. He was informed that his personal connection to one of the victims made him unsuitable to remain involved, and that it would be best for everyone if he took a leave of absence and let the professionals handle the situation. Sarah remained in protective custody in a secure psychiatric facility while authorities decided what to do with her and the others who had been found. Marcus visited her regularly, bringing flowers, old photos, anything that might help her reconnect with who she had been. Sometimes she seemed to improve, smiling as she looked at the photos, remembering moments they had shared. Other times, she looked at him as if he were a complete stranger, or worse, as if he were something to be feared. Doctors weren't sure if she would ever fully recover, or even if recovery was possible, given what had been done to her. 6 months after that rainy night when Marcus had found Sarah again, she disappeared once more. The facility where she was being held reported that during the early morning hours, despite all security measures, Sarah was simply no longer in her room. The security cameras showed her sleeping in her bed, and then, in a single frame, she was there, and in the next, she wasn't, as if she had simply ceased to exist. No alarms were triggered, no doors were opened. She simply vanished. Marcus received the news with a mixture of despair and, strangely, relief. Part of him was afraid of what Sarah was becoming, of what the experiments had done to her. In the following months, other patients who had been rescued from the complex also began to disappear in similar ways. The authorities tried to keep it secret, but rumors began to circulate in the police community. There was a theory that those responsible for the experiments were recovering their subjects, eliminating evidence. Others speculated that the victims themselves were being activated in some way, programmed to return to their creators when certain conditions were met. Marcus began to have nightmares where he saw Sarah with those red eyes, no longer human, but also not completely something else, trapped somewhere between two states of existence. The BODYCAM footage from that night became crucial evidence in the federal case, but it was also partially released to the public following a court ruling on government transparency. The video showing Marcus approaching the car and his initial encounter with Sarah went viral online, generating countless conspiracy theories about government experiments, mind control, and even supernatural explanations. Marcus tried to ignore the media attention, but it was impossible to completely escape it. He became the unwitting face of a case that no one truly understood or knew how to solve. 2 years have passed since that night. Marcus still works as a police officer in Portland, still drives the same streets, still responds to calls about suspicious vehicles. But now every car he approaches carries the possibility, however remote, that he will see that face. Again, he keeps the evidence he collected from the case at his home, boxes and boxes of documents, photos, recordings, everything he managed to copy before being removed from the official investigation. He knows he shouldn't have done it, that technically it's a breach of protocol, but he can't let go. Some part of him still believes that if he looks long enough, if he connects the dots the right way, he will understand what really happened to Sarah. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus reviews the BODYCAM recording from that night. He watches frame by frame, especially the moment when Sarah's eyes glowed red. FBI experts said it was probably just a reflection from the flashlight, a camera artifact, nothing more. But Marcus knows what he saw. He was there. He looked into her eyes and saw something that shouldn't exist. He wonders if Sarah is still there somewhere, trapped inside whatever she has become, fighting to get back. Or if the person he loved really left 12 years ago. And what he found in that car was just an empty shell, an imperfect copy animated by something he has no words to describe. The truth is, Marcus will probably never know. Certainly. And that uncertainty is the hardest part to bear, not the loss itself, but the impossibility of fully understanding what was lost and what was returned.